One of the countries I wanted to meet with was Pakistan.
We also want to talk about India, Kashmir. I mean, it's a huge humanitarian crisis taking place.
You know what I do? I trust this gentleman right here.
8 million people have been locked inside illegally, unconstitutionally. The only reason they are locked up is because they are Muslims. The Hindu Kashmiris are not locked up. We can come up with some sort of a strategy to prick the conscience of the world. Narendra Modi, who is the architect of the state terrorism.
Assalamu alaikum, you're watching Views and News and I'm Faisal Rehman live from our PTV Islamabad Centre. Today we'll be talking about the visit of the Prime Minister to the United Nations, where he has held some very important meetings, starting from Mr. Erdogan, the President of Turkey. He also met the President of Iran, Mr. Rouhani, the President of Switzerland, the Italian Prime Minister, the Prime Minister of UK, Mr. Boris Johnson, as well as the senior world leaders, and also the President of the World Bank. Since it was a very, very committed visit of the Prime Minister, and the issue of Kashmir was the first and the foremost agenda. Interestingly, so far what we have witnessed during this visit, that the Prime Minister has focused on Kashmir. He has tried his level best to advocate for the misery of the Kashmiri people when we talk about the overall condition in the Indian occupied Kashmir till date. Today is the 53rd day, I'll repeat, it's the 53rd day that the curfew has been imposed, acute shortage of food, drinking water, medicine, as well as the medical facilities. According to certain sources, around between 13,000 and 15,000 youngsters, especially the college-going students, they have been picked up and they have been arrested, and now they have been sent to various jails all over India. On the other hand, when we talk about as far as the diplomacy of Pakistan, I think on the diplomatic front, they have fought this case very wisely. Whatever the Prime Minister could have done, he has done it. But now he's trying to gather a lot of support, and he has been able to do so. At least the Iranians, the Turkish, the Chinese, they have all supported Pakistan in this very important issue. The Prime Minister has also said that this is the nuclear flashpoint, and if something is triggered, something happens that could lead to an absolute, I would say, devastation in the region, not only in the two countries, but the entire region, and eventually the entire globe is going to suffer. And he's also asked the world leaders, in particular the President of the United States of America, Mr. Donald Trump, to intervene and diffuse the situation between the two nuclear rivals. How far he has been successful in this particular visit, we'll talk about that. And tomorrow he's also going to address on the floor of the United Nations General Assembly, where he's also going to talk about Kashmir in particular. He's going to raise the question about the right of the self-determination of the Kashmiri people, their right to freedom, their right for this particular indigenous homegrown, I would say, this movement. But interestingly, so far it seems that the Western world is closing their eyes. They're not talking much about it. If you remember, during the last meeting between the President of USA and the Prime Minister of Pakistan, Mr. Khan, the US President very clearly and categorically mentioned that he was approached by the Indian Prime Minister in Japan, and he had asked him to sort of play the role of an arbitrator. But now he's taken a step back and he has said, well, if the Indian Prime Minister or the Indian authorities in particular, or their government wants us to intervene, both the parties, Pakistan and India, should agree to this particular proposal, then US will interfere or intervene. But still they have to, because this is not only a regional issue, this is a global matter at the moment. Whosoever is talking about it is saying that this is indeed the nuclear flashpoint. This could trigger a war which is not going to stop, and that is going to cause a lot of problem. As we all know that wars are a problem itself. They are not a solution for any problem, and the remedy is basically to sit on the negotiation table, generate a proper dialogue, a meaningful dialogue, and come up with some sort of a remedy. But having said that, the Indians, even on that bilateral front, are not ready to negotiate with Pakistan. It was an absolute unilateral decision taken by the Indian authorities, Indian government, and in particular the government of BJP, and they have taken away the right of self-determination from the people of Kashmir, and on top, after abolishing the Article 370, they have practically caged the Kashmiri people. Now, it's our right, the right of the Muslim Ummah, of the Muslim countries, as well as the global powers to intervene and sort this issue out before it leads to some devastation. To talk about this, we have with us in our studio, let me introduce you to our panelists. We have with us Ambassador Mohammad Khalid Khattak Saab, senior diplomat, sir. Thank you very much. We also have with us Mr. Tariq Pirzada, needs no introduction, is a senior analyst, and will be shortly joined in by Javed Siddiq Saab, who's a senior journalist and also a columnist. Pirzada Saab, thank you very much for your participation as well. But sir, if I may ask you a straightforward question, sir, as far as diplomacy is concerned, since you have been serving as an ambassador in so many countries, on the diplomatic front, sir, if you want to sort of evaluate the effort of the Prime Minister, where would you rate him, sir?
Well, frankly speaking, he has done well to the extent that after decades, he has been able to sensitize the world about the gravity of situation in Kashmir problem itself, its root causes, etc., etc. But, well, unfortunately, this is Hobbesian world. This is not world of Rousseau, and then United Nations record for solving problems is extremely poor. One thing that we tend to forget is that United Nations came into existence in the aftermath of the Second World War, as a result of the Second World War. And this was basically, you see, to deal with the fallout of the Second World War, to manage the process of decolonization, in which 3 or 4 new countries were also created. But starting from Korea onwards, this organization unfortunately has not delivered as much as it is expected. And secondly, that United Nations is not like a court where a decision is given, dry and cut decision is given. United Nations is a forum where in the final analysis, these are the permanent members of the Security Council who matter. And to get any problem moved ahead, you know, or to solution moved ahead, you need a consensus of the 5 permanent members. And that consensus, unfortunately, has been in most cases missing. So, you know, to start with, this hype about, you see, the going to the United Nations should be a bit watered down, you know. A problem which is 70 years old, which is complex, which has many dimensions. Initially, it started as a communal problem, you know, which in fact led to the creation of Pakistan itself. And now it has become far more complex. So it's not going to be, you know, immediately, you know, sort of solved or even immediately addressed, let me put it this way, in any meaningful way. Notwithstanding what the Trump has said or what the some other leaders have said. So, and today's United States of America is not the same as it used to be. Today, you see, there are limitations to the American power also. You know, a kind of a Cold War, which is economic Cold War between the United States and China has started. There is Russia, which is playing its own hand in Europe and in its near abroad. You see, you have a Syrian problem, you have a problem in Yemen, you have a, last but not the least, you have a problem in Afghanistan. And then you have the crisis, you see, between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and that again is a very serious crisis. So, you know, much that I would like it, I would rather avoid to be over optimistic about, you see, the immediate outcome. Yes, we have sensitized the world community, but there is every likelihood that major developments in the world, you know, could take place, which would overshadow, you know, Kashmir issue, and this issue could go back to the back burner. And the fact to see that we have not discarded bilateralism, you know, is again, you know, creating or having a recipe for a stalemate. To begin with, Mr. Bhutto, who had many rounds of talks with Swan Singh before 65 to solve this problem, knew about the sterility of bilateral dialogue. And then, you know, he also said that he will fight for 1,000 years against India, et cetera, et cetera. But some years later on, you know, then he was having these talks with Mrs. Gandhi and settled for a bilateral, you know, solution, and also upgradation of the ceasefire to the line of control. So these are some of the sort of liabilities of the past, and which came to, you see, sort of put Kashmir on the back burner.
Because at that time, the Indians were talking from a position of strength, correct, sir? Now, Faisal Saab, currently, it seems that the Americans are really sort of supporting the Indians at every level. When we talk about the strategic relationship, the power sharing, we talk about the transfer of technology, we talk about intelligence sharing, we talk about sharing of the bases, we are talking about manufacturing of F-21, new version of F-16s, and plus the kind of commitment the Indians have given to the Western worlds, including France and Russia for that matter, from where they'll be buying weapons worth of dozens of $1 billion, maybe more. So obviously the economic muscle is much more stronger than Pakistan. And in today's world, I think morality is at the
on the
back burner. And when you talk about the economic diplomacy, sir, that is the name of the game. So how would you evaluate the visit of Narendra Modi and the visit of the Prime Minister and their efforts towards, you know, gaining support from the Western world in particular? Sir, your take.
The key, the centrality of the whole issue is that India and United States are strategic partners. Somebody has to understand that. They are strategic partners in the real sense of the word. From everything from defense to technology to space to culture to education to technology to investment, everything. It's a comprehensive package called strategic partnership, and this is really in the literal diplomatic sense of the word that is being practiced between the two countries. So that has to be understood. So when Narendra Modi, the murderer of Gujarat and Kashmir, goes to United States and has a public meeting attended both by him and President Trump, that shows the level of closeness and the nature of their
and if you look at the words, the most trusted ally, the country we can trust, the man we can trust. I mean, this is the way he was introduced.
Now, to the contrary, I don't disagree with Trump that most of the previous governments have mistreated Pakistan. And he just turns out to be a very different president, at least in a limited sense.
But what he's doing or what he's saying is also mistreating Pakistan.
What he's done is, actually it has done something good as far as our fundamental agenda that is right now we are promoting in the United States, which is to familiarize the global issue, the issue of Kashmir at the global stage. And in that respect, the President of the United States, through his various references, press briefings, and the late last night Pakistani time briefing at the United Nations, in which he summarized and conducted this survey of his 3 days of interaction with the world leaders, including, as he mentioned, Mr. Imran Pakistan. So he has been actually raised the issue of Kashmir as far as the familiarization angle of the whole issue was concerned, and the involvement of the world power, at least to the extent of in a rhetorical way. Because prior to that, we didn't know, the world didn't know that, basically. Out of 196 countries, you can have 5 powers who know this issue. The rest of the issues, countries either didn't have any interest, or even if they had some interest, it really didn't matter. So now that last night, when not a single channel in Pakistan was reporting the press conference of the President of the United States and his summary of his visit at the UN in the last 3 days, he literally, and I focused on what he was saying and I heard it again and again, he said it very clearly, and I think in one respect I have to say, whether it translates into reality or not, obviously that's a very difficult proposition. But as far as the message of Imran Khan, that these are 2 nuclear powers, if you don't resolve the issue of Kashmir, the situation can get out of control. And he sold that message yesterday very clearly, and he said the situation is very grave, serious or grave, one of the 2 words.
That makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense.
Now let me just stop right here. Now the issue is, this was the prime reason why the Prime Minister of Pakistan went there. But then the second thing is, there are 2 things. A, there are 2 statements made by our Prime Minister. I mean, I have supported him all the way and I will continue to support him. But this is what has happened. I don't think that the Foreign Office did a good job in terms of apprising him as to the extent he should characterize his own belief in war and peace. What he did was, on 2 major occasions, he said, I'm an anti-war Prime Minister. So when you have occupied Kashmir under Indian guns, 900,000 of them, and you are making a statement that you are anti-war, remember, an ambassador is sitting next to me, he will correct me if I'm wrong, that you never take anything off the table. So when you say you are anti-war, you're taking one major option off the table, and that gives the other side a license to continue the occupation. Second, he said the same thing.
Don't you think, sir, that was a responsible statement?
No, it's not a question of being responsible.
Such statements from Mr. Kim Jong-un, but not Prime Minister Khan, sir.
No, Kim Jong-un never made a statement like that.
He said, I'll nuke everything.
No,
whatsoever is in my reach.
No, but we are not asking our Prime Minister to come up with that rhetoric. All I'm trying to say is, if a part of your territory, which I think Kashmir is under Indian occupation, an area that is larger than the former East Pakistan by 7,000 square miles. So all I'm trying to say is, and then he made another statement, I cannot attack India. That was the second statement 2 days ago. You don't have to make these statements. This is all I'm trying to say. You can say a lot of things that you believe in peace, you want to do it in a peaceful way, but you don't give a license to the other side. Hey, the other side has no intention of getting into a military conflict with us. We can continue with this occupation. So somebody did not advise him right, number 1. Number 2, there is a major problem at the present time, which is this.
Faisal, if you allow me, sir, we'll just take a break here.
Okay.
After the break, Ambassador will return. And
I just want to add one line.
Sir, we'll definitely, I'll give you ample time after the break. So we'll just take a break and we'll return.
Education, if that money was spent in our own country, it would have given employment to people. We've got a young population. That money ended up in foreign bank accounts in Western countries, in properties in Western capitals, in offshore accounts. And we have been trying our best to retrieve that money. Even when we've located properties made out of illegal money in Western capitals, we are finding so many legal lacunas and difficulty in trying to get that money back. And I'm afraid there is a lack of political will in the rich countries because they gain from it. And the poor countries do not have the resources. We do not have the lawyers. We do not have the infrastructure abroad to actually retrieve that money. And so, two things happen. Not only are we deprived of the resources that belong to us, if we get them back, we will spend on our human beings. But secondly, it is not a deterrent for corruption. So the criminal ruling elites of the developing world keep taking money out of the poorer countries. And because there is not enough of a deterrent, they know that they can get away with it. They all end up in these offshore accounts and these, they get these companies, and through companies they buy these expensive properties. So just to conclude, there has to be a political will in the richer countries. No matter what aid that goes from the richer countries to the poor countries is minuscule compared to the money that is being plundered from our countries and ends up in these offshore accounts. I do not understand why in this day and age you have these offshore safe tax havens. Why? We know, why are we protecting even rich countries? Why do they protect these people who avoid taxes? Why is there so much greed? And then, especially our countries, we are being, we are being plundered by these elites. And simply because there is nothing, there's no, if this was treated like drug money because it kills people, or like terror financing because it kills people and West worries about it, this same thing, the money laundered from poor countries into rich countries, that should be treated exactly the same. It kills far more people. Thank you.
Welcome back after the break. GP Arslan.
Okay. The second thing that I was trying to point out too was that the Prime Minister himself quite aptly summarized, the world situation and the world reaction to the Kashmir situation. He said, I am extremely disappointed that the major countries around the world are not showing any special concern for Kashmir. And he said it very bluntly. Then he used the phrase, had it been some 80,000 Jews or 80,000 Christians or other people,
even even
8 Americans, what would be the reaction? That was a powerful comparison.
Statement,
I think that was one hell of his piece of his delivery that he did at that time. But at the same time, now that he has quite correctly summarized that the world is not supporting Pakistan at the present time, and he said it very bluntly. So we come to the conclusion of what our ISPR director, General Asif Ghafoor, said in his last press conference, that when diplomatic options are exhausted and nothing happens, it goes towards war. The situation goes towards war. This is what he has said at the end of his last briefing. I don't want the situation to go to war, but if we don't do what is necessary to pressure India. Remember, so far, despite the familiarization of the Kashmir issue at the world stage, there is no pressure that is building on Narendra Modi. Because on the one side, we are saying we are anti-war. On the other side, we are saying it's going to be a long haul, like our Foreign Minister says. So the third thing is how to build pressure on India. So you have to make some strategic maneuver, let me use a little sophisticated expression, in the form of some action somewhere along the border involving the occupied Kashmir, so that we can create a situation that draws the world attention. If you don't do that, if you don't support the Kashmir freedom movement with money, with the finances, with intelligence, with the semi-military means, with military means, all I'm trying to say is, and be prepared for war. Just do that. That is the only way you can put pressure on India. Otherwise, Sheikh Makhdoom Qureshi, our foreign minister, is right.
All right.
You know, it will take.
So if you'll allow me, sir, we've been
it's
joined
gonna
in.
be a long
Reza
haul.
sir, we have been joined in by Anwar Iqbal sir from USA, who's a senior journalist and a columnist. Anwar sir, assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum Assalam.
Anwar sir, thank you very much for taking out your time and talking to PTV World. Sir, first of all, sir, your take, since we are talking about the diplomatic effort of Pakistan, and in particular the statements issued by the Prime Minister of Pakistan, Imran Khan sahab. How do you take that, sir? Do you think we are building enough pressure on India, or do you believe that India is going to get persuaded to any level, even if the Americans intervene or if they don't?
There are two levels of the discussion that are going on here. The first, and obviously the most important, is that of human rights violations in Kashmir of the Indian Sea. That is already it has been more than 50 days now, and they are refusing to lift curfew. They're refusing to restore communication links, and there is a shortage of food. There's a shortage of medicine, and all those things. And on this particular issue, the international community, I observe, is at the United Nations also. Most of them are with Pakistan. There have been plenty of articles in U.S. newspapers. There have been discussions on US TV channels and everything. And in bilateral meetings and other seminars and conferences, they express sympathy with the Kashmiris on this particular issue. The other aspect is that of a permanent solution of the Kashmir dispute. And there has been, although Pakistan has raised that to the Prime Minister has in every forum that he attended, but the international community is still, or seems still, reluctant to get involved in that.
Second point is, sir, since Donald Trump very openly said that India is our partner, and India and USA, they're both fighting the war against extremists, in particular the Islamic extremists, or the Islamic radical faction, or you may call it, basically he was referring to the war, so-called the war of the Indians in Kashmir and the American war all over the globe. So do you think that that statement in particular was a direct support for the Indians as far whatever they have done after abolishing Article 370 and whatever is going on currently? He hasn't talked much about the human rights violation, neither he has talked about what's going on out there, nor he is talking about the misery of the Kashmiri people, sir.
Did you see what he did the day after he made this statement in Houston? He came to New York, met Prime Minister Imran Khan, and he said that the statement he made was not about Pakistan, it was about Iran. And then a day after that, there was a news briefing here where Indian journalists asked him at least a dozen questions on Pakistan's involvement in terrorism, and he refused to answer any of those, actually. And he once again said that this terrorism is coming from Iran, not Pakistan. So he obviously is avoiding to condemn Pakistan on this issue too. So he is trying to maintain a fine balance between India and Pakistan. Obviously, U.S. interests require that he maintains a closer relationship with India.
But Iqbal Sahab, my point, let me repeat my question again and let me rephrase it rather. Because when you talk about Iran, obviously they have issues with the Americans. The Americans are right after Mr. Rouhani's regime. But what I'm saying is that India and Iran are strategic partners, they're defense partners, they have signed a pact. Correct, sir?
Correct.
But the point is that India is not fighting any war in Iran for that matter, or anywhere else in the world at the moment, sir. But according to them, basically, what we have understood that the Kashmiri Mujahideen, the freedom fighters, and the people who are the custodian of that indigenous homegrown movement, sir, practically they are sort of, they're labeled as terrorists.
No, hold on. What he was trying to do was to try to create a space for himself, what you call plausible deniability. He didn't want to actually he knows that there's no Iranian involvement in India and Pakistan or in the Kashmir dispute. Basically, what he was trying to do is to say that, look, what I said in Houston was not directed against Pakistan. Don't drag me into this dispute. My effort is focusing on encouraging both countries to find a solution. I'm willing to mediate if India agrees. The thing is, there is a realization in Washington. I mean, I am based in Washington. We regularly interact with U.S. officials, and they say in so many words that we know that even if we want to, we cannot. We cannot force India to do anything. We cannot persuade India to do anything because it is a major power. It will not take the type of pressure that other smaller countries do. This is the Americans realize their limitations.
All right, thank you very much, sir. Ambassador Saab, during one of the press briefings, President Trump, in fact, used these words. He said, fellas, work it out. Just work it out. Primarily, he believed that these are the two nuclear countries and they've got to work it out. Now, primarily, Pakistan is ready for talks, for negotiations. Indians are not. Do you think Trump can or Trump will persuade India to begin this sort of stalled negotiation process, sir?
Well, I'll give you the answer to that, but first, very interesting point that Faisal Saab raised regarding advice to the Prime Minister. Let me tell you that when it comes to Kashmir and India, the advice to the Prime Minister is given not just by the Foreign Office, but also by the establishment and armed forces.
Sure.
On the day that he left, a day before earlier, a day before, he had a meeting with the army chief also. So what he says there, it can't be ruled out that doesn't have input of the other institutions as well, number one. Number two, that there is a saying by Talleyrand that you don't go to wars, but wars come to you.
You don't seek wars, the wars seek you.
Yeah. So this is what perhaps Imran Khan wanted to convey, because in the same context, he said that there are two nuclear powers and there's this live dispute between them, and they are you see, facing each other, and the consequences could be disastrous, not only for the two countries and the region, but for the entire world. So, you know, I don't think that he said that Pakistan would be sitting idle or Pakistan doesn't want war at any cost. But what he said that Pakistan has a peaceful intentions. Pakistan wants to solve this issue through dialogue and not through war. But at the same time, Pakistan would not be, let's say,
Cannot be bullied, sir.
reluctant to, you see, to go to war if attacked. Now, coming to your question, that can President Trump solve this problem? Look, let's go back a bit into history. Even when India was attacked by, or there was a war between China and India, and it wasn't just Chinese fault, and President Kennedy offered, you see, unconditional support to India. Even at that point in time, you see, India was hesitant to accept all the assistance because
Don't you think the times have changed now?
India by itself, a big country, an economy of scale, would not like to be, you see, pocketed by another big power. It may like to work as a comprador for them, you know, to be the policeman for them. But, you know, India would not like its own space to be kind of occupied, you see, by the, you know, big powers or so. And that's the, in fact, the main kind of, you know, issue between India and China. It's about the space. Then we have to think about another thing, that don't we have the experience of Kargil? In Kargil, the classic theory that when two countries are superpowers, they can afford to have proxy wars. And this theory was introduced by the Soviet Union and vis-a-vis the Western powers in Vietnam in Africa.
70s.
Yeah, 70s,
60s,
or
70s, yeah.
70s. And, you know, we also thought that we could fight a war in Kargil because both the countries by then had become
Nuclear powers.
nuclear powers. But what happened then? The agreement of 4th of July over the sanctity of LOC was not signed by India. It was signed by Pakistan and the US. The Indian side even refused to come to sign that treaty. And then at Kathmandu, President Musharraf had to walk.
Go and shake hands with Mr.
Shake
yes.
hands with the, you know, with the.
Mr. Vajpayee.
With Vajpayee. So, you know, what are we talking?
Okay.
What are we talking? We are a smaller country. Our capacity to fight, yes, is there. We may be having the best army, the most experienced army. But one reason for these events that have taken place is this, that perhaps in India's reckoning, an economically exhausted, politically polarized, and militarily overstretched Pakistan will not be in a position, you see, to counter the Indian move. And Indians have taken...
And the threshold would be very different.
Yes.
See, that is going to be the problem.
Precisely.
And
Precisely.
then, I got your point, sir.
That's the point.
Faisal sir? Yes, sir.
Here is what it is. Well, Kargil was a disaster because the way it was planned by General Musharraf, even without the consultation of Air Force and Navy, and not with the best of the military minds available, it was his idea. He did it, and he didn't care to consult even the civilian government. It's a reality of our life. Number two, you don't. Let me just finish. I will lose the point.
Navy or the army chiefs.
Yeah. And Musharraf said it in his interviews that I did not consult because I didn't need to consult them. It's very simple. Let's forget that side of the story. The whole idea that you're not engaging in a situation or entering into a territory for the purpose of keeping the possession of that until there is a trade-off between that and some other objective, that was a disaster to begin with. I mean, what is it? No, there's no other country that would have done this what Musharraf did, which is that you say, these are just mujahideen who have gone in and they have, occupied these peaks, and Pakistan has nothing to do with that. That is the most bizarre military way of entering into a territory and issuing a disclaimer about it that you are not responsible for that. India did the right thing. They realized the weakness of the position he had taken, and he took it to the White House. And then, of course, we had very weak leader like Mr. Sharif and very weak general like Mr. Musharraf. So all I'm trying to say is there is no comparison. If you think for a second, if we had an integrated war fought in 1965, that was not an integrated war, air, land, and sea, we would have really come out on the top. It's just a question of having a clear strategy and a clear goal. If you don't have a clear, well-defined goal, strategic objective, to use the right word, you lose it. This is exactly what happened in Kargil. You have to pressure India by making a strategic move. And let me give you why I am
Are you saying that kinetic operations is actually the remedy for this?
Yes. Here is the answer. I'm not talking about an all-out war. Two things. Support financially with semi-military or military means the liberation movement. It is your right under the Charter of the United Nations, number one.
The world would say that this is like supporting the terrorists. I mean, sir, we have to see what the globe is thinking at the moment, sir.
May I say, because India has dismantled Shimla Agreement, India has dismantled ceasefire line, India has dismantled line of control. Legally speaking, I'm a lawyer. With my education from here in the United States, there is no border at the present time as far as the line of control is concerned. The so-called thing called border, I'm using it quote unquote. There is no such thing at the present time because they have incorporated, legally speaking, they already had the physical possession. 62,000 square miles of territory by simply making some legal amendments into their system. So that change has virtually changed the legal structure of the so-called borders that we call line of control or ceasefire line, as we used to call it. Or I'm not talking about the international border. I'm just talking about Kashmir and the line that divides us at the present time. So it is my very humble submission that unless Pakistan would take a very tough stand, listen, let me say one thing in the end. I'm an old-time student of strategic affairs. Pakistan has never been in such an ideal position as far as its conventional ground strength is concerned. With 1,400 tanks with 125 millimeter guns, we never had that advantage ever in our history.
What about them, sir?
I'm telling you, I'm coming to
They're
that.
eyeing at
All right.
becoming the
They are still in the
next
process.
superpower.
They are still in the process. They have about 3,000 and some tanks. More than half of them are Soviet era vintage. They are in the process of refurbishing them.
Rafales they are buying. I mean, they'll be upgraded by the Israelis.
Oh, fine. Let them do it. This is at the present
Jaguars
time.
they have,
No,
the
I'm
Bra
talking
2000s
about
they
at
have.
this given time. At this given time, then you have 800 other tanks, about 2,400. You have missile forces exceptionally superior. Really ideal.
Don't you think
Hold
that
on.
should be used as a deterrent?
No, I am saying that. So you do what I just suggested, you make some strategic maneuver, support the liberation movement, and if India takes any action against you on international border and that, you're in a very solid position as far as conventional deterrence
All
is
right, sir.
concerned.
All right.
And on top of that, let me use the phrase of the Prime Minister, then if it comes to nuclear weapons, you're on equal footing. They would never go that route. Most of the people who talk about the use of nuclear weapons in this country, they're wrong. India would not use it because we also have it. So finally, it will be the conventional weaponry that will decide the fate of Kashmir.
Last closing remarks, sir.
Well, let me tell you one thing. We have seen from the Second World War, to counter a Hitler, you need a Stalin, you need a Churchill. To that extent, you see, Pirzada Sahib is right. But let me tell you that it is always more prudent not to think that your enemy is weak.
Of course not. Correct.
And if we think that India is weak, given its size and other things, in a convention, it was
the kind of influence they're enjoying at the moment.
And precisely because in the conventional field, in a long-term war,
They have an edge.
what we have seen have been conflicts. 14 days, or 3 weeks, 4 weeks, these have not been wars. We haven't seen modern wars. So for this reason, we have to we have to combine diplomacy plus pressure. But the pressure has to be something which is palatable to the international community also. Because if that pressure is not palatable to the international community, the pressure of the international community would also fall on us.
One last point.
Last quick
In
comment.
1974, when the news broke out that the Greek forces were about to land on this island of Cyprus, Turkey was a very poor economy. They were really in bad shape. Their forces were not, world-class forces as they are at
But
the
they were
present
dealing
time
with
today.
Greece, sir.
But
Twice bigger than Greece.
no. But that's another issue. The issue is, it was a maritime operation. Remember,
All right,
it was not a ground war.
Well, sir, we will definitely talk about the options in one of the coming
quickly,
shows.
Quickly, the point I'm trying to make is, they went in. They were about 15 or 20% of the whole demographics of that island. The Turks took about 40 or 35% of the territory. Then Secretary of State Henry Kissinger said, you have attained your strategic objective. Please stop it right here.
All right.
You have to attain
All
your
right, sir.
strategic
This
objective.
is actually what Indians have done. But,
Yes, they have.
That's what I'm saying. I mean,
But both are members of NATO, number one. Number two, Turkey was twice of the size of Greece.
maybe bigger if not.
Maybe,
Yeah.
But it
but
was a
bigger.
maritime
No.
operation.
No. Secondly, inside Cyprus,
All right, sir.
Makarous
All
was
right, sir.
toppled by a military regime, and it was the internal situation in Cyprus which led to, you see,
This
the
particular conclusion. So, but anyway,
Correct.
Ambassador, thank you very much, Faisal. It was a pleasure having you. And that's all we have for this hour. I'll see you again. Till then, you take good care for the Hafiz.